Good. We'll say the prayer on page number 10. In English, on page number 11, I take refuge in the Guru, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. From now until my enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. and by the merit created this practice, may I attain the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, feel bias, attachment, and anger. This ground planted with perfume, strewn with flowers, beyond mirrors, encircled by the four continents, surmounted by the sun and the moon, I visualize this Buddha food and offering. May all living beings enjoy the pure air. Inna Guru Namamena Maneyandaya.
No so kan ko samalo sam trustil shira.
Good morning to you all. Thank you so much for joining me in this morning's discussion.
Terang da yukmong cho gamba ro namjin nang ba ngoni tong de no chila to ni yon chang chang te cha ni. Terang ko chang ba ko gom ja de hyang ji gom yin chan de gom. Hyang ji gom man da yin.
So your presence and the all individuals here this morning putting me under the impression that so each of you are advanced practitioners and who are genuinely dedicated to Buddha Dharma. So therefore, I will not make the unnecessary comments or elaborate on the important point which usually I do. Rather, I'd like to request all of you join me to meditate on the Maha Karuna or the Great Compassion.
Tramba nyamzo gomber sha ta sangi ke song tramba nyamzo se de kitong tramba nyamzo se tong gom se ni pa ti chi pa chho se tramba ina gom bi chao yo ma ra te tramba nyamzo gomber sha se tramba se de tramba se pala tangbo yi kha ko yu de semne majla cheni de la komdi shi wa chila gom zini ta thani ta ko re
Yes, so we're going to meditate on Maha Karuna, the Great Compassion. But let me again remind you. So we have in Buddhism, we have the four mindfulness of meditation. The four mindful of meditation. Here you see the two different concepts. One is the mindfulness, that is meditation. So for mindfulness meditation. We have to know the mind. To be mindful, it doesn't mean you are meditating. Right? Mindfulness is not necessarily the meditation itself, but to be meditated well successfully, you have to be aware of. In other words, you have to be mindful. So, simply speaking, you have to, before you approach meditation itself, you have to know what you are going to meditate on.
다 냥지 곰 요르조 냥지 곰 서조 등을 리타나 삼비 삼로 그러 다 텔라 조 등을 리타니 삼로 텔라 등을 텔라 네 심자고 거라니 등을 등 기르비 차와 말 등을 텔라 네 무바 텔라 등 정도 네 잡을 섬 넘게 네 등 로알 심진라 무비 등 심진라 무비 냥지 칠라 무비 냥지 멈글라 무비 냥지 네 섬시고 진짜 샘진남 비 형지스도 샘진가도 당가로 등이 등이 돌아와 등도 당다 텔라 삼로 당다 텔라 샘진남 비 형지스 칠람 비 형지스 당가로 직당 안에 맞다 바르다 같이 랑아도 쳐와 만도바도 기와던 쳐와던 나와들 तील 만도 바르다 만도비 통도 같이 로데 좀때 또 칠람 텔람 근데 아니 로드 샘진 형지 다집에나 तील 로야데 아주 미 기체종 같아요. 말 간종 같아요. 말 창말로베 뎁치든 같이 가서 참아 좋아동 나올 정도 로드 이제 텔 삼존의 심신도 탑지 능력이 삼보텔 칠람 빙하지레스 다 머무빌 람비 형지세 때 kitang ne ngara zu nguen jin nga se da tan zme dang jin zambi nga se te tinde rangjin ji de pa chi yo mar da rangjin ji de pa me jin de me pa chi la yo par zam ne te ne te la te ne chadang ki ne mat ne ding le sang ne kro ko chi gi ken chi ngur te la te ne nyang ji gom ba te la mamung ba ma be nyang ji o nyang ji sa yu gom yi sim yo re la nyang ji gom ding la
So let's say we're going to meditate on compassion, and before that, so just like I said, we have to know what we're going to meditate on. So to understand this point, we have to know that in Buddhism, in general, we talk about the compassion. We are simply saying that our wish, and we have a wish, and we have an objective, okay? And we aimed to achieve some kind of outcomes. Okay, in this case, is that we aimed to make one thing happen, that is to help all sentient beings and let them assist them to be able to separate themselves from the suffering that they are enduring. Okay, so separating or release or relieve and take out the sentient beings from the painful, stressful in a life living experience. That is our goal. That is the outcome we're going to achieve. Right? So the question is, what kind of sufferings are there? So generally speaking, in Buddhism, and so as contents of it, that there's three different types of suffering. That is suffering for pain, and the suffering for changing, and the suffering of the pervasive suffering. So suffering of change, and the suffering of the suffering for pain and suffering of pervasive suffering. Those are the goals and the separate all sentient beings from the three sufferings. That is our objective. So that's the outcome is our outcome. The type of outcome we are aiming to achieve is to separate the all sentient beings from those three sufferings. Now, so those three sufferings can be the way to free all sentient beings, or the separate all sentient beings from those three sufferings can be done through the meditation or the Dharma practice. And here in this particular case is that by the practice of three Mahakaruna, the great compassions. The first compassion is the compassion that the aim and by the reflecting or thinking of all sentient beings suffering. So the second is the compassion is it's the compassion that aimed at by reflecting of the status of the sentient being, and then the last one is the compassion that can be developed and by reflecting upon the Dharma. So let's say the compassion that you reflect upon through the reflections and of the is the suffering. The suffering is that you are essentially looking at you're essentially comprehending or try to understand and the pains or the stress or any form of dismay that sentient beings are experiencing at the feeling level, meaning they are feel and they are experiencing, they're going through and through that undesirable, unsatisfactory experiences of the life. Then the
등을 라고 봐. 그래도 당 칠라 뭐 봐. 뭐 별 뭐.
Yes, so the first compassion that can be developed is by analyzing, right? The functions and or the very awful and undesirable nature of the suffering. So suffering here means that primarily focus on feelings, right? When that sentiments went through and the pain. So yes, so I understand the suffering and the awful and the status, the functions, and of the suffering. Then you can develop a great compassion. In other words, by understanding, oh, that's the suffering, that's what the functionality of the suffering is doing to, and all sentiments at a sensational level, and then you can develop the first compassion, a compassion that's by reflecting upon the suffering. Then second is compassion. A form of compassion that can be developed is by kind of zoom in and or scan through or reflecting and analyzes and think of the sentient being in general and their status and the kind of the life experiences and challenges and all the hindrances or difficulties that they are undertaking, life they're undertaking, or whatever the things that they're going through, which basically is unsatisfactory. So by looking, understanding the sentient being in such living in such under such circumstances in such a condition, and then you can develop the compassion by reflecting upon the sentient being in general. And then the last is the compassion can be developed, or compassion that is developed by reflecting upon the Dharma, or we call it the objectivelessness compassion. So objectivelessness of compassion is that this kind of compassion can be developed by truly understanding the ultimate nature of all sentient being, and particularly the how they've been constituted, and what are the ultimate the nature and, of the sentient being, and then so this profound and deep reflection on meditation, and by the means of understand the all sentient being ultimately is that all phenomena, all sentient being is that as the term says, the objectivelessness. So we think there is the beings phenomena sort of objectively is and running and sort of owns some kind of autonomous status, but in fact it is those that very objective is objective, not just objectiveless, but objectiveless, and then you reach the point where you understand the objectivelessness, and this can be help you to fully develop the third Mahakaruna or the compassion. So this means that you for example, when you look from the general sort of circumstances, and it will help you to understand and go more deeper. Like when you think about phenomena, right, such as a death, right? Death, regardless you are young, poor, rich, or you're young and old, young, poor and rich. In any cases, that death makes no difference. So therefore, the only conclusion we've drawn is that of there, it is not really something solid or is differ from one particular being to other, but rather everyone sort of he has the same destiny in terms of how to deal with the death. So therefore, this is general sort of a phenomena, right? And this phenomena, the understanding of this phenomena or analysis, the analysis you're going to conduct based on this kind of general phenomena, then will lead you to all the way to deeper, and finally to the point where you understand that, after all, so all phenomena or the dharma, which basically is instead of objectively existed up there, in fact, it's true, absolute, and the status is objectivelessness.
다 이 통통통시고 그 통통통기라 이 뜻이 나옵니다. 그런 검증할 때다 능력이 등을 삼는 거 많이
So today we're going to meditate on within the three, we meditate on the meditation of the suffering.
따때 무일소 단당하고 남랑디가 중심이 막 탑지바 때라 삼동네 anything 아랑도 때라 막 탑지비 풀라베 미통진바다 강가처럼 소소띠낭라 요나 간다 용사데 던데 삼루지 당네 띠낭 용다 딩은 때네 졸라마 진도와 따삼네 인티 강라 때나 때 탐지 딩은 때리 있잖아 삼비 소라 삼루 당로지시.
So here what do we do? First of all, bring yourself to the scenario. In this case, is the war taking, and in this very moment taking place in Ukraine. And I think that you are the individual in your mind, and the individual who are actually being that very place. And so, and then think if you were here, of course, we are mentally imagine the scenario. But think of you are there, and all those who are there, and now you are sharing the sufferings caused by this brutal war. So if you were there, and how stressful it's going to be, and what kind of a fear and the undesirable experiences that you have to experience from moment to moment. And so reach this point of deeply understanding the sufferings that those beings are right now undertaking or experiencing of there, and then generate a deep compassion for them.
때려 뭐미 망보지요를 파쇼스 순이가 로총총 망보지 다랑 시시연단 봤던 안에 지금 로총총 샤톡지 마치 조그마한 거 같다 맨다칸의 신록이 그러지 때 시교 때 정말 소소랑이 그 년천로도 소소랐던 요비다 던지지나 간다 용사리 삼로지 당로지.
And secondly, you also think about the soldiers from both sides, and they are typically very young age. So those youngsters, young men, women who are in the battle from both sides, they're shooting and killing each other. Now imagine you are one of the parents or siblings and family members from both sides, and feel how stressful you're going to be and how painful and you would find yourself, and then develop a compassion for them.
따텔라 요비에 막 탑지비 강성도 탑지 찍질라 샘땅네 찍질라 당 위때 요마다 랑음에 버베 첨공인데 용화자 어떤 탐자랑 하면 받은 게 직질런 정보 같은 게 강아지 대삼로 직당 놓치지.
And lastly, also think about in the battlefield, and both sides are engaging in such a the senseless killing and the act of killing. And we know that both sides, those youngsters from both sides, they don't know each other. They really have nothing and hate and against each other. But because of the lawmaker, the law, and then the people, one side, both sides made it, and but due to the forces of the enforcement of the law, and then they had no power and no choice but to engage in such a senseless killing, and then think about that, and then develop compassion.
That in gang king 그 강라 또 근데 배트나 보든 로이나 콩이나 뜻당 그 명지 사원 매봤더니 산이 말되나 또 조네 셔당 당 당전 고한도 손에 니 진행하 세니 칸티 다 어디 이제는 너 신즈비 온 거다 디 랑진 거 막았다 용하듯이.
So now also look about or think look at and think about Russians Putin, and essentially Putin himself by with his fundamental nature, and he is not an evil person fundamentally, as far as his very basic humanity is concerned. However, because of his and because of his anger and his grasping a self of a person or attachment to his identity, and so he had developed this strong misperception, which is the part of the concepts. So that concept is the focus on the self-interest, and then driven by the anger. And for that reason, and so he ordered and then started this war. And then think about this. Put in the cases of the Putin in the under such circumstances that we know he is doing so because driven by the hatred and attachment, and then develop compassion.
괜찮다는 듯 탐전 랑매 버르니 때리 지실라 땐 종공이 때리 종에 봐다 하고 다 등에 때 탐전다 저월 소치서 담네 등에 저위 자샤데다 네 폭파찬데스 그지 나와든 아든 등기 남 그리셔 샤송년 등을 많이 도연지.
So think all this, and the only conclusion we can draw is that all this happening, the forms of sufferings that we analyze is as item by item, and so we know that all this happened because of the not self determined, but rather is other powered. So in other words, if all these outcomes and they become the reality is because of the under the influence of something else. It was is involved a certain particular cause and effect, a particular cause and it's a conditioned outcome. And in other words, this is a perfect example of dependent arising. So things are dependent upon each other, and meaning that certain cause, because of a certain cause, and then from that cause and produce the certain result. So think of all this, and then like in this case, we try to meditate on develop the compassion by reflecting upon, meditating on the suffering. So and our understanding of the suffering, and like once you understand the status and the sort of the characters and or features and everything about the sufferings that we just explained, and then So then meditate on the compassion. The compassion is at this particular point is specifically means that you're compassionate. You develop a compassionate mind, and the mind is focused on the aspect of separation. That means that it's your compassion now is giving you a strong sense of the sufferings, essentially means from all the sufferings that we explained, and then that very aspect of separation or the spiritual and reality or spiritual experiences and the compassion that you developed now is turned in the form of Avalokiteshvara, or the Buddha of compassion, or manifested as a Buddha of compassion, or Buddha Avalokiteshvara.
That's money dozo mani pabni home data te khatung man she ling wisum tan roa tan da ding yang jiba tang lo sama ding sum te shamba tang yang ji ngo pa tabshi ni ki ngo gerne ni home sen de tenjong go den da ga tenjong go chpa de nga zo magi sem ki ngo chong ar da nga zo sem de tenjong da sham yang ji gi jang de ki di tenjong go den ni sem ji de tang dewa tang da mer chi yamur sha de ni 많이 이렇게 라트pen 로이 이렇게 탐지 참네 심지 탐지 gel라든 탑시 인원들 송 삼네 대화동 송 삼. 네 양지가 정이 샴바도 고마이나 다도 지금 생각도 많이 먹어도 보면 처스기야 타면도 뛰는데 선마요.
We're going to at that essence, or that the where we have just described the and then recite the Om Mani Padme Hum. So we have explained that when you recite the Om, and then remember that is represented the body, speech, of mind of the being. And again, as we explained it, everything, but which basically is the body, speech, of mind, and the upaya, or the skillful means, which is the compassion, and then the Dhamma is the wisdom, and the Vana is the home. Home is the dependent horizon. But think about all the meanings, profound meanings represented by the six syllables of the Buddha of compassion, and then think that all sentient beings are be able to attain or achieve the greatest the state of enlightenment, which is basically is the outcome or the result of the compassion and the practice of compassion and the wisdom. So then have the strong compassion and compassionate the feelings within you, and then recite for the Om Mani for about 300 times.
Page number 70.
Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Te sala ko per shong na ne she pe ken ma da ga de ji ne yi ga ni de shong ni she ne shang zhe lu de per shong ya da ka zhe bu tu de ma ru ra shou zheng ya dong zhi gong la du te da wi da dong da kren zhen ba ya dong zhi gong la ya dong zhi gong la bo yi ge la 그러면 단다 다만 그 참조는 때 오고 자도 지금 막 오나요. 샴 탄다 말씀드도 된다위 다당 덕그런 좀 봐 말이봐 산길 코리 자월 셰슨느즈네 너도 다당 덕그러 랑기 찬이기 드버존나 달라 착바기 되는 덕기 대화 탐질 스판 끼라 덕기 대화형 덕기 월 넘바 마테월 랑메버 덕기 와라 스파티네 데 균 줍니 데라 윤든 또 통든지고 데나 데니 네 덕기 와남 덕기 대월 르sit 레노스 데트르키위 뇨몽키 린드시땅 리키짱 콜 찬일 조르데 동니 든치와리 린 뇨몽 김춘전 드시 뇨몽 리다그닐 리키 린 리키 김춘전 스음카 오니드 께르스 시송데 데르터 데타오 치키 콜콜 람발라 녜와 니니트 조로오스 도르송마
Give me a second. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So on page 118,
동네 저다 잘 저버 동네 든치와 단다데 롱당주 동네 든치와리 세트 파트데 디 바로나 참칭도와 근데 시송소세 진도 더니다 마송 된다위 당당 dak근 점바 마리 발렌지네 디 강데 차닐 거치기 당든 한기 당당든 이때면 보통 뭐또 또뭐 어떤데 롱뜨가 또 찬이다 저장 시송 때들 치기 코로코로 름발랑 녀와니 버 년이트 조로즈 곰 접스고다 이요 또 파트 단다 돈요 된다위 당당 dak근 점바 마리 발렌길 기 코르위 자월 셰츠너즈네 됩니다.
Yeah, page 118. Well, train yourself until you have a clear, ascertained this process of cyclic existence. The way to eliminate ignorance completely is completed is as follows. We have to eliminate it by familiarizing ourselves with the absence established through reasoning of the object of its mode of apprehension in relation to whatever object it focuses on. The greater being, Dharmakiti,
그렇지 나겠다. 갔다 이거 가서 로손.
only those of the Damakiti so his pardon me and because of almost 3 weeks and we didn't look at the textbook I got confused. only by the shoot up the textbook. So the danger the Maru Patanji Koisa Jitsu
너 떨더라. 거의 맞더라.
Jitsu is going the way to determine the new okay. Yeah, okay. 120 maybe. Okay, 120. There's no one to alter it. Nah.
그런 거 뒤나 지나 딱 여기.
Yeah. Take the notes. I thought we stopped at the 120, like the way to determining the view of selflessness. I think that we started here. We should start here today. But I'm not sure. Yeah, the base in the one tells on it. Basically, did no shabu depends. This one says somewhere.
너 자꾸 저번들 로디오다. 아. 그 따로 때 로디오다. 뜻하는 진이 용이.
저기 소매가 토리에서 보내는 거 저거죠. 이거
딱히 로는 게 근데 토트는
Yeah. Okay, let's just I think it's not harm and let me continue read and then we will get there, I guess. Apprehension they include page 119. No, Bishop says we didn't read this. My notes says we did it, but maybe that's when I make a preparation, I take notes like that. Okay.
That's
116. 116. Therefore, from the viewpoint of imputation by thoughts, although lacking existence by way of their own nature, attachment, and so forth, are explained as being like the snake. Sorry. This is three kinds of apprehension depth. Apprehension. Yeah. Okay. Yes, again, go back to 118. Because we read this like on page 118 says, when meditate on selflessness, you must clearly identify how the object of negation is apprehended by your own innate misconception of self, alloyed with intellectually acquired conceptions. Okay, and detailed recognition of these come about through cultivating close relations with the spiritual friends of the great vehicle and pleasing him for a long time. Therefore, such a method must be thoroughly pursued, just as the great being Haribandra has said. The undistorted instructions is to please the spiritual friends impassively. Impassively. Now, how innate ignorance the conception of I and mine acts as the root of the cyclic existence. When I and mine are apprehended as existing by way of their own characteristics, attachment to self arise within that generates craving for all kinds of happiness for ourselves. The happiness of the I is not found independently. Without reliance on the happiness which is mine, as a consequence, craving for my happiness prevents us from seeing its faults. So we only see its good qualities. As a result, the conception of mine is accepted as a means for bringing about happiness for the I. The disturbing emotions thus generated give rise to compensational action, and that in turn propel us into birth in cyclic existence. Nagarjuna's 70 stanzas on emptiness says, action are caused by disturbing emotions. Karmic formations have a disturbed nature, and the body is caused by karmic action. So all three are empty of their own entity.
어떤 니 도도 가르치고 그잖아. 당진 기용 당진 그 코리 자와 질리 가는 질리 지당 간다래 저와 당으로 아니 당진 코리 그 자와 지당 가르는데 소소 당보가 세트페 랑진지 접아지 좀 바래. 아니 텐이 접아서 마하마 코치네 랑진지 접아가 세트 가르페 스치라 템모가 때 랑와지 삼삼동 텔레 텔라테네 nga이와 텔레 nga dewa gogundu seni nga yuan zbi ten zba dewa tel chaung zo dewa tel chapa ki yong chapa ki yong zo tel ten dewa zbi deshi ki yong deshi ti ang ani ta tel ton tin yong so ani sem chapeng ten le sa yong le sa na le gang ani ti gang ten khwa tab yong ota khwa khwa tang do 당진 그런 거 코라 코팅도 된지들이 이제 다 롱동섬 노르로 디네 전에 된지스고 티도는데.
Okay. So one essence is the essence of this paragraph we just read. Essentially, and as you noticed, and it's talking about the relationship between our misperception of self, technically. The grasping at self of a person, our misperception of let's one step back, ask this question. So then, how we don't want to be we don't want to be unhappy and experience any suffering. But then, why we continue doing so? Why are we are still suffering? So to answer this question, and then we have to go back and see how the process of through what kind of process and or the status or the kind of procedure which brought us to the point where we feel unsatisfactory or unhappy. So the first, we have to know that we have this sense of, we all have the sense of I, which of course, under the circumstances prior to enlightenment, that I is misperception of self. So you claim I, that very I is nothing but a misperception, right? And in other words, so when you claim I am here or I am so and so, you are basically and express the grasping at the self of person. Now the grasping of self of person, right, once degenerated or by mistakenly, right, by misunderstanding the actuality or the ultimate reality of the self-identity, you claim that I is mistaken, right, by its very nature. So then, so your claim of I and will be generated. Once that developed, then you will experiencing that the experience the pleasurable, desirable experience, and then you will consider that's mine, right? So my happiness and my pleasure and on my well-being. So that sense of mine now is a separate entity other than I. So you're essentially attached to the misperception of self, I, and then you further through the experience of something pleasurable, and you develop the second misperception of mine, my happiness, the entity, the separated. So because of the pleasurable, the experience is pleasurable and desirable, you will have a strong attachment to it. But meanwhile, you totally have no idea it's a sense of I and my happiness is dependently arising. But in your mind, they are inherently exist. They are exist and on by their own, right? And they are sort of self-existing and independently existed. So, and then because this is you're essentially so wrong at this point, so therefore you're going to want to grasp it more, and for the sake of your own, that's what you consider is pleasurable or happiness. And so from there, you develop a strong sense of the perceptual understanding of you and the things that relate to you and happiness. So all this is complicated. The network of perception or conceptuality is developed, and then of course from there you try and all the time. Whenever under all circumstances, you try to hold on to that self, grasp yourself person, it means perception of self, and then the happiness that you consider to yours. And this action, right, which you take in, and then accumulate the karma. And then the karma, as a result, that turns you or bonds you up onto the circle of death and rebirth that we call the samsara. So that's why we hear the scripture. We have the scripture and explain this process, except for the analysis, the author analysis the process itself.
다들 말로저긴다. 니와는 봉알라 더미비 따와 단란 베파 밥게상. 단란 베비 츠는 마르게 사바 봉알라. 디 일강라.
11 o'clock.
무그니 쩨튼 종위. 전동지 일 메퍼 르비 단란 베비 돈 고르 셰바 리 방게소. 당니 쳔보 치지 딱비. 디 일 심진 메파나 대봉와 니마인 시송 송소 때터 Teter Mayember Ducky Dagla Lotiwa Tildiwa Zam Combatant Yumi Yeminso Kant Mantui Matoba Zam Combatant Gashi Garsha Chi Sharni Ripi Shopa Shepi Jisu Gombe Tse Rishiki Nyovi Tun Li Jen Kantayan Zin Ninzin Mepi Matoba Zam Gomba Nam Gomba Chatter Sekyang Danzin Ki Sawan Pangmani Vites Tangbo Gasha Dagla Loyilla Lo Shimba Mekyang Danzin Ki Zindang Ki Loshuk Niwardan Zimba Mandig Pisharos Dagmepa Lo Mashivisher Teng Namdali Shamso Montang Gamishir Shintaniwa Sarchuman Shitang Niwan Yome So Zimbi Topa Kangin Dembatan Topran Zimbi Yil Kangin Ba Tamchikan Damil Talamba Ripi Grsha Dembatan Chitin Drewa Yan Kambo Hashangi Lingal wa Sovi Iwa Grsha Capture Shoso Sambana Rishiki Gent Tanlap Papjan Gombi Tsi Deli Gent Gombana Jemete Kirwi Sherte Ki Gent Tani Nixa Gent Genos Deyang Jekangi Tante Ngomber Shimba Zongwi Shinteyla Kunzin Tanki Doshuk Niwa Giwa Gentna Kuman Nagbi Nag Ji Pangshiwa Tang J Shargo Zone Lunabgo Taos the Watersna.
Train yourself until you have a clear ascertained this process of cyclic existence. The way to eliminate ignorance completely, eliminate ignorance completely is as follows. We have to eliminate it by familiarize ourselves with the absence established through reasoning of the object of its mode of apprehension in relation to whatever object is focused on. The great being Dharmakirti has said in his commentary on Dignaga's Compendium of Valid Combination. Without discarding these objects, one is unable to eliminate it. Instead of doing that, if we, one, merely familiarize ourselves with collecting and establishing our thoughts, or number two, we acquaint ourselves with a non-conceptual state in which thoughts about whether things are existent or non-existent, whether they are or are not, no longer arises. Or number three, if in meditation, following analysis of the general appearance of what is generated, our analytical understanding differs from the meaning intended, or we meditate merely on a non-conceptual state in which we do not recognize emptiness. However long we prolong the meditation, we will never be able to rid ourselves of the seeds of misperception of self. With regard to the first, even though the mind is not involved with the self to be negated, it does not actually apprehend the opposite of the way the misperception of self-apprehension. Because it is not involved with the selflessness, the commentary on Dignaga's compendium of valid cognition also states this. Since love and so forth do not directly counter ignorance, they cannot eliminate that grave faults. The second mistaken approach is to confuse any and all object of any kind of conceptuality apprehending existence, non-existence, and so forth, with the object apprehended by the conception of true existence, that is to say, true existence, which is the object of negation, established by the reasoning that determines the selflessness. This is like rekindling the system of the Chinese abbot Guo Shang, or for the object of negation is too extensive. The third mistaken approach is to establish something other than the view of selflessness through analytical awareness, so that when we meditate, our meditation is misplaced, since it is unrelated to the right view. It is like being shown the racetrack, yet running in the opposite direction. Moreover, since clinging onto any specific objective base is the basis for what is apprehended, we must discern the fact that we must discern the fact that counteracts the manner in which we apprehend it. To do otherwise is like trying to catch a thief, but avoiding following these tracks, or like making appeasement offering at the western door to the spirits who has fled through the eastern door.
단디 노도카를 저왔던 거잖아. 딱 코라 녹음에는 코라한테 간다치 방고를 간다 단전이 종아리서라. 단전 코라 녹음에는 다 단전 방고를 단전 등은 녹음에는 코라 리 종아리서 코라 방고 코라 방나 코라 간지 단전나 때니 종아리. 다음에 똑배던 똑고래지. 다음에 똑배던 또나 간다지 똑고래지 저한테 용어서 아니 다음에 똑새도 코랑 디그 당든 좀비 당든 그 년보 코랑 갑자기 년보 때니 곰네 동거마 또 아니 지 샴당 형질라 소바틱 또 많이 배 아니 지 배나다 something 지역메비 곰세로 등 아니 요미 메미 그따와서 때데 지 날 마키 곰몽부 자와이나 이 그런 건 모인 그게 다음에 뜻 안에 같이 듣고 말해야지. 다음에 또 맡으나 당진도 또 듣고 말해줘. 다 다음에 또 알아 간다지 또 거르자. 다 당든 좀 받대 간다지 나세 당든 좀 방진지 잡아 요래 세대 간다지 당든 짠이 띠땅도 파 심지지니 탈드 짠이 손에 많이 봐 온조 다 당세 오늘 방진지 잡아 짠이 만들고 하지. 나도 매종나 짠이 매파르잖아. 짠이 매파다 말을 그때는 종아점이 누워하지니. 띵 내리때 시송나 아니 때는 종아점도 이마 또 랑진지 잡아다 랑지 카노 그래. 배나 니마당 니마처럼 좀 만배 네랑 지금 맨도왔다. 뭐바든 코니 나시노시르와 나시노시 때랑 지금 단지문인 거지 나시노시르 지금 오늘도 지금 매아 찾고 있어. 대자 안에 샴바당 형질라 소바 때 말해서 코 기똥 때라 노가 용거다. 이나 샴바 gel라 샴냥지 gel라 기나 당즈 매아 치긴 여와 말지. 코니 따와 놓아지자. but in chim ye dangzin dangten zambe dangzin mewa chola tangbo dangme togor dangme topala tangbo dak korang gala simji chine dak te niling ngoma te kandar ti niling ngoma te ha ko songa na ta tane dangme tong gore ta showa ta nge ta yokozu shimdura ta te modu ye songa simji.
So, yes, we've got a clear objectives, goals, that is to be free from the sufferings. And then, as we just read, so the text clearly pointed out so the way actually paved the way for us to achieve that goal, right? That goal for this individual self and for others. And so the simple thing is this: if we do not want to experience any suffering, and then we have to know the causes from which we are enduring or experiencing the suffering. And so our searching quest for the cause of the suffering, shows that everything we can blame on can be blamed is our misperception of self, our grasping of self of person. So therefore, the answer is, if we do not want to experience any sufferings, then we have to eliminate its very cause. Okay, that cause is the grasping of self person or misperception of the individual self. And then by large, if we extend it or broadly from the holistic point of view, so if we do not want to repeat the pattern, repeat the patterns of samsara, meaning that death, rebirth, and rebirth, and re-death, then we have to again to find out what is the primary and secondary cause of that very undesirable samsara, meaning the experience of born, birth, and death, and reborn, and re-death. So here, the answer is very clear. We experienced the sufferings, all kind of suffering is because of grasping the self of person. So therefore, our task, the mission is, the practice is to eliminate the grasping the self of person or misperception of a person. And otherwise, so if we do not do this, if we focus on something else, right, and take it as the means to achieve our goal, meaning root out the fundamental cause of the samsaric suffering, and such as like meditate on compassion, kindness, or some other technique. It helps, but it would not address the actual cause of the samsara. In other words, it would not help you to root out the key causes of the suffering of the U.S. individual and the samsara as a whole. So yes, so the direct approach, the most effective approach, the only way to approach to eliminate the causes of the suffering, and that is to understand the selflessness instead of hold on to and grasping self of a person, but to understand the selflessness. So, yeah, to understand in order to understand realize the selflessness of person, selflessness of phenomenon, first we have to know where, how this I or the self is affect you, how it appears, how it kind of functioning, and it's a kind of mode, characters, so and the behavioral pattern. So we need to understand that the look and closely and examine carefully to find out this mistaken self behavior, and it's a sort of a false, it's an absolute false and nature. So once we understand this misperception of self and its behavior, and then we understand, we will see, oh, so that very self is of a mistaking, it is a production of ignorance, and it is not inherently existent. It is in fact does not exist at all, but it does not exist the way it appears to us, right? And so this doesn't mean that when we talk about selflessness, it doesn't mean there's no self at all. But when we say the selflessness person, we are saying that the self that you believe, right, is self-sufficient, right? It's independently or inherently existed, and that self is the object negation. That is self. That perceptual concepts is of a misconception. So we need to eliminate that very misperception of self of person, and then we will understand the self, which is, even though does not inherently exist, but dependently, it exists in the way that dependently, and it existed dependently, meaning that even though it's a lack of, void of autonomous status, but it does exist through the process of labeling. So therefore, we're not completely deny the existence of the self, but in the context, we accepted the I, or the concept of I, and by knowing that, by understood that it is free of, void of the inherent existence, but independently, dependently, right? And we see that the I and the self, so it's functioning and harmoniously. So therefore, understand the selflessness of person, meaning that you understand that the phenomenon is inherently devoid or free, devoid or empty of anything that is independently, autonomously established. So the self again here, to eliminate the misperception of self, like we said, there's no any other means that can directly help us to root out this ignorance other than the wisdom, develop the wisdom, a pure view, a clear view, which clearly realize and see the true nature of the self. In other words, it clearly can see the falsehood of the misperception of self. And So here is another point I like to make. That is, if you do not pursuing the meditation that focus on the selflessness of a person, but you kind of make effort in the practice, the different practice, the different techniques, such as like kindness, right, or generosity, and so on and so forth, which it's as a technique, it helps, but since the meditation of kindness, right, and the misperception of self are not sort of the relationship between two is not often against each other or opposed to each other, right? Because let's say you meditate on the kindness to pretty well, but that doesn't mean, right, your practice of the kindness, your meditation of kindness will naturally, automatically help you to root out the grasping at self of a person or the misperception of self. The only way, as we emphasize this, to help you, that the only way that helps you to root out the grasping self of a person or the misperception of self of a person is the wisdom that understands selflessness of a person. Why? Because selflessness of a person, the wisdom that understands selflessness of a person, and the ignorance that that is grasping self of a person, or the misperception of self, is mutually exclusive. Okay, mutually exclusive. They are completely opposed to each other. In other words, that's so when misperception of self is arise and is functioning, it's taking and play the kind of a governing role, then the wisdom and that understand the true nature of the self, a selflessness person, and would be oppressed. In other words, by contrast, if you develop a clear view, a clear understanding, realizations of that, clearly see the true nature of individuality, or the true nature of all phenomena, then there's no chance for the grasping of self or the misperception of self arise or do anything. So therefore, we need to make an effort to do a very good research and to find out how to practice the practice the meditation, and then like whether the text taught as here. And I myself, I'm afraid I only can offer this much because this is quite a subtle and difficult topic, and so sometimes I wonder myself.
Okay. That's wise.
Okay. Any questions for me, please?
Okay.
So in your meditation, then, would you be meditating on emptiness, sunnata? Would that be a key to helping you to understand the concept of not grasping at yourself as a person, and that the conceptuality of all things in your meditation?
Okay. So last part, can you please repeat again? I want to make sure I understand you.
So in your meditation, I mean, you would, well, I'll use myself as an example. You would meditate on kindness, but kindness and compassion is not going to free you from the grasping of self. So you could turn your meditation into the meditation of emptiness, all things of being empty of inherent existence. And would that help you to understand the not grasping of self? That seems to me that would be what you would be thinking about.
The self appears to you is like the what? I'm back pardon.
딱고 샘도 참아 년보를 요서 배다 샴도 냥지로나 셔당 당도 년보 원 수수 년보를 요자 다음에 또 오거나 다음 메시지 메규테 다든 좀빈 좀바티 가서 배 담보죠 저땡 매와 또 오고요 티 닐리 또 오고 다 샘도 간단한 티칭가 닐리 또 오고 기똥처럼 샘질라 논트 정도나 bên thakpa dhit zim dawana thakpa dhire sami samdangdana ti thakpa is hama kuwar dhil mayimba toktukuyo tinja ne tinang zi chig dokshuk semri yoza toktukuyo bena ngaro daga meba gombayana ni samdagi samdangur daga sayad kanda chig daga yotang me sayad taga chungde ngaro semri duwa ta ana daga tang yotame semina semde kana dingini semde tan sona semde lelo chuni nyegam tena azu ni kursu kanda ni kunde sanite hago mo ni ku chasona ti baro den nga se de chuni me song ji hago mo ne ten samtana ta nga nga samton da ten tengde ten ta chong gomba dak se de soso ji nga chi de mo nga se lamsang nga se de kanda de samtong nga se de yo mare nga yo me de kanda jogor 시 딱 쪽으로 니 샘부 딱 쪽으로 니 샘 딱 쪽으로 니 샘도 가나 샘도 잔이도다 대 판통은다스 등이 섬지라 미수 라고 말어
Yes, so the point is we need to find out antidote, okay, the opposite force, and then apply to and then rely on that opposite force, which is technically called antidote. So in this case, we have this the sort of innate sense of I, right, and then we have we have an attachment. We will attach to it, and so this is the problem, right? Then so once we recognize that is a problem, then we need to find out the antidote. In other words, the something that can help us to eliminate that very mistaken that mistaken thoughts or mistakenly develop the sense of I, which is in this case is grasping the self of a person. So now you are trying to understand the method or emptiness and try to understand the selflessness of a person. And basically, what you are doing is you are trying to develop the strong, a clear and strong, and the sense of the force that is which is the understanding of the actuality, which we call the antidote. Right? Simply speaking, like you made a mistake, right? And you recognize you made a mistake. Then you think how that mistake occurred, why sort of something happened prior to your action, right? It's misled you. So what is that thing which misled you to that very point? A classical example is under the circumstances or under the influence of the circumstances, you mistakenly thought curled, right, a rope in the dim area somewhere in your basement, right, from distance. And when you saw it, you thought, oh my God, there is a snake, right? And then that conception, a misperception, or understanding of that very object, which essentially is a rope. But because there are some similarities, right, you mistakenly think that it is a snake, and then you got so scared of it, right? And then you are constantly under the influence of this fear and worries. So the same, we can use this same example and take this example and then examine our own conditions, our own attitude, our own experiences of our I, ourself. So we see where is I. So sometimes quite often you will find, oh, I'm no good. Oh, this is a problem and I have to deal with it. Oh, why this happens to me? So you constantly have this kind of thoughts, and from time to time. Now you do need to examine that very I. We say, oh, this is not good for me. This is not. I'm not good, or I did this wrong. So at that very moment, you might to kind of very carefully examine how that I is occurring or taking place or functioning, and it influences your decision. Yeah. So then if you examine this, most likely your examination of this very I, the occurrence of I, right, will inform you that the I which you find actually was by your own mind. Okay, so your mind is the one who had this idea of I, or concepts of I, right? And then you could find out, oh, my I, right, is my thought is producing. It's like thought is the producer of that I. Right? Then you pause, right, and for a second, and then look at the very mind that make that I, or that is maker of the I, that produced that I. So then you find that very strangely, you cannot get find that the mind. In other words, you cannot locate in that I, that mind who had this idea of I at all. So that's how I applied the examine or apply this sort of deal with this I. Is strangely enough, when you're doing this, you will reach the point to say, oh, so that I, of course, is which caused me pain, which is not there because the mind produced it. And then where is mind, then you kind of find it. Right? Especially like it is, I sometimes wondering that, when we go to bed, we all say we have I, we are kind of some kind of eyes individually. But when you go to bed, if you pay close attention, right, and towards the last point of before you fell asleep, right? And so that very, very last moment, and you fell asleep, somehow just give you no kind of clue of your I, and what is that I, what that I is, and how it is doing something. It's not, because next morning you fell asleep, and then that I is kind of vanished. Yeah, so the good example, and I guess again we needed to use, or can take it as a great example, and help us is about the misperception of the rope, and the misperception of the snake, and based upon due to the fail to understand what the rope is. Then I guess then you look at I, and my understanding of I, and then my mind, and then my mind what is my mind would probably helpful.
아까 왔다는데 기저종 때 탁파 듣던 좀 봐주거라. 탁파 듣던 점 얼소 탁파 듣던 점이 직박이 얼소 대네 배나 잘랑 잠바 지금도 대들 말다지나 코티 직박 세트고요 말 배나 생이부 들 말다지나 대들이면 잡으려 말때 샤만냥 지가 그 노고부터 탁파 그런 거 땅도 손에 심지지네 오 대들 말다 탁파래 따지네 같이 하고서나 뒤 같이 되니까 탁파 듣던 점이 직박 따라 매어 쳐서 어디 나진 코 로스치기랑 가서 나갔던 점이 다음에 봐 다 전에 손에 많이 비 때린 종아 좀 임바 하 타조용으로서 어다 나랑도 라진기 산기기 나가지고 삼이 때랑진 식으로 또 शे고 다 너도 배로
Yeah. So now go back to the snake and the rope example. Obviously, if you look at the snake rope, you mistaken, and you think that as soon as you, the moment you mistaken thought that rope is snake, but then you get a fear, right? You will develop a fear. So the fear is a problem, right? Fear is the pain, and fear is the suffering. So now our task is in that very moment, right? How to get rid of the fear, how to free ourselves from the fear. That fear is has been developed, and the only way to overcome this fear or free ourselves from the fear and the thought that it was the snake is to make a close research and an exam, and that object which gives us a fear, which essentially was the rope, and you thought of the snake. So then go back, right? Go back and carefully examine the source of the causes, and the source that causes the fear for us. And so that's why that's what we know by common sense that by common sense that that's the way we can overcome the fear, because we go closer and carefully and approach the object, the source of or the causes of the pain or fear. Then as soon as you realize, oh my gosh, it actually is not a snake, it's a piece of a rope, and then automatically you will free from that very fear. Similarly, but that's how it works. Imagine, here's the thing. So you develop the misperception. Now you're under the strong fear. Right? You experience a strong fear, but then you kept thinking, meditate on the other means. Try to free yourself from fear. The other means like kindness. It would not remove the causes of fear. So therefore, the way to overcome the original, the real causes of the suffering, which is grasping itself of a person, and just like the snake, mistakenly the rope mistakenly be thought it was a snake. So we need to do the same thing. And our mind, has to constantly develop all kinds of perceptions and concepts, but the concepts and the conceptions we developed, so will give us affect our experiences. So therefore, our task is go back, examine what will be informed, right? What is actually going on? What is happening? So this very exam, a careful, critical analysis exam, would eventually take us to the point of the opposite point where we are experiencing. So we are we're essentially under this strong influence of the innate grasping self person, which naturally think that the self is existed by itself and it's by its own operating and its own power and so on and so forth. Everything is happening, taking place inherently. But if we move, we take action, right? Move to take action, moving towards the where the fears are generated, the fears are sort of coming from. Then when we reach at a point, oh, actually, that's innate grasping of whatever would be misinformed by the grasping self person, and which is innately sort of it's an innate ignorance. Then we will ultimately, instantly free ourselves from the fear that has been generated by this misconception of self.
Okay. Ja, wieder pray. No, so, stille.
Thank you, Geshe-la, Tempa, and Tenzin. If you would like to make a donation, it would be greatly appreciated by the monks and the monastery, and you can do that by calling 812-336-6807 or by emailing the center tmbcc.kcl@gmail.com. And it would also be for our translator, Tenzin. And if you would like to make a donation here in the temple, I'll pass around the begging bowl, and you can make a donation or you can say a prayer into the bowl. Thank you.
Closing prayer on page number 88. Oh, sorry, 80. 80.
Lo me mare ke don do na de ya ve wang bo da de ma son de te ro gon do ya ve yang ji te ve ji son da ve ren ba gong tang lang ji nie ne de ve ya na nie xu rang ye zhe shen dou mi ang jie shi zha zhe wei zhang wei ta jie ji zhou wei ye ye men ba se shi wei rang dang ye rang zhen zhe ben ba ren xian zhou ye ma zhou qiao jiang yang bei zhe wei xiong den yang zhe xian bo you re zhou gong ang de de sa wer xie fer se jie ya wei mo xiong zhen de la zhou xiang jiu nan ji ren bei tang du nan jin ye ma guan de yang wei zhao ba rang de zhong zhi lang zang zhe bei
Thank you.